Hey everybody, Tim here, back with another vlog. As you can see, I've added some graphics to my presentation, and by graphics I mean my computer because I don't have a budget for real graphics, and I don't know how to use any of these video movie making programs to create graphics. So we'll just have to go with this. It's probably blurry. I'll work on that next time. But what I wanted to talk about this time was what I like to consider in-between or transition bands. And what I basically mean by that is in the early 90s, 1991 to 1992, grunge pretty much took over the rock scene and pushed everything hair metal to the side. And it was necessary at the time. By that point, hair metal had pretty much turned into really clean cut guys with big perms playing really cookie cutter, cheesy music, a long way from the gritty, dirty, sleazy rock of the early 80s that came out of LA and even in some cases England with the new album movement or new wave of British heavy metal. Um, but you have bands that kind of fall in between the cracks there. So, like maybe a band that like taking the early 80s or late 70s, early 80s, when punk rock was kind of a big thing, like underground punk rock. It wasn't cool to listen to bands like Van Halen, Motley Crue, stuff like that. But one of the bands that a lot of the punk rockers in that era liked was Motorhead. Very much a rock and roll band, but for whatever reason, if you were like in the punk world or the alternative world, Motorhead was like one of the only rock bands that you could get away listening to in that scene. Excuse me. Same thing kind of happened in the early 90s when grunge took over. Now, there's a couple of bands that, in my opinion, kind of fall in between the cracks somewhere. Not to say they aren't part of a certain genre, but for whatever reason, they managed to transcend into the grunge era. One of those being Guns N' Roses. A band from Los Angeles, a band out of the hair metal scene. But when grunge took over, Guns N' Roses continued to thrive until they imploded. But they continued to thrive. They were a band that, for whatever reason, even though they had hair metal leanings, their music was gritty and real enough that they transcended when grunge took over, and they didn't fall to the wayside like most of the other ones did. Um, Another one would be the Cult. Now, I'm sure I'll take a beating at some point stating, like, oh, the Cult's not hair metal, the Cult was alternative and all this kind of shit. Bullshit. The Cult, they might have had some alternative leanings. They might have been a little bit darker, maybe the goth side of hair metal, but those guys used just as much Aquanet as everybody else did. Um, but again, a band that was cool enough for the hair metal guys to listen to, but on the same token, was very accepted in the alternative side of things, much like, say, Motorhead was with the punk rockers. So those are kind of some of the in-between bands that, that I consider, maybe part of one genre, but definitely transcended into other genres when other things took over from decade to decade. Um, so moving right along to my next screen here. Now I want to get into what I consider to be somewhat transition bands. And what I mean by a transition band is a band that maybe didn't fit completely into either genre, like going from hair metal to alternative or grunge or whatever, but maybe got stuck in the middle somewhere because of a certain song or whatever may have happened. The first one of those I want to talk about is Saigon Kick. I talked about them in one of my other vlogs, the Rock Candy Remasters one, I think. But this band has always been very interesting to me because they're a band from Florida, and they had a huge hit in 1992 with a song called Love Is On The Way. One of the last quote-unquote power ballads, if you want to call them that. But unfortunately for them, because of that ballad, they kind of got lumped into the hair bands. And that was during that transition period from 91 to 92 when grunge and alternative pretty much took over. And unfortunately for Saigon Kick, because of that song, they got lumped into the hair band era. So when it came time to do their follow-up album a year later, nobody cared. And that's very unfortunate because this band, while, I could certainly see them maybe having, some acceptance in the hair band community, we're very much not that at all. Their music is very diverse, very quirky, and in a lot of cases has a lot more in common with grunge and alternative than it does with hair metal. Again, they're some of their stuff is fairly mainstream. Some of the stuff they did later was very kind of coloring outside the lines type of music. But in my opinion, they had just as much in common with an Alice in Chains as they did with, say, like a Guns N' Roses or whatever. But unfortunately for them, because of one song, they got lumped into a genre, and unfortunately, were not able to build on any success after their huge hit "Love Is on the Way." So that's Saigon Kick. Another band, in my opinion, that got lumped in onto one side unfairly would be Faith No More. Faith No More, as everyone knows, had a huge hit in 1990 with a song called Epic. It was one of the front runners of the rap rock thing that kind of took off later in the 90s. Obviously, behind Aerosmith and Run DMC's Walk This Way, and behind Anthrax's I'm the Man. But definitely one of the first few rap rock songs that were ever released that was ever a hit. And it's funny because that song really has no hair metal leanings whatsoever, but it happened to come out during a time, when hair metal was still king in 1990, and they were getting airplay right along with Skid Row and Motley Crue and Bon Jovi and all the other groups that were huge, in 1990. And unfortunately for them, despite the fact that that song really has no leanings in that direction, and that every other piece of music they've ever done really kind of fits. I don't even know if you call it alternative. They're kind of a genre all on their own. Because Faith No More's follow-up album, which I have pictured here if you can see that, it's called Angel Dust. In my opinion, top 5, one of the best albums ever made. Very diverse, and so out there that their record label didn't know what to do with it because they wanted to hear another Epic, and Faith No More said, we're not doing that. But unfortunately for them, and don't get me wrong, I realize Faith No More has a lot of fans, a lot of diehard fans, and that are into any genre. They kind of cross the boundaries of rock in some ways, but they never really achieved any more huge mainstream success after Epic because of the fact that, in my opinion, they got lumped in with the hair bands, and of course, when that transition took place, there was no room for Faith No More, even though they really had no leanings whatsoever towards the hair metal genre from sonically speaking, and I guess fashionably speaking as well, because they didn't look like a hair band. So I never quite understood that. Another one would be King's X. King's X had a hit in 1990 with a song called "It's Love." I would say hit. I mean, I use that term loosely. It was a minor hit. It was enough to get them a gold record, but that was about the extent of it. And beyond that, had no other real hits other than maybe some things that got played on Headbangers Ball in the middle of the night on Saturdays. And it's unfortunate because, again, here's a band, it's a power trio, very much in the style of Rush. They were very progressive, were not a hair band, did not look like a hair band, did not fit the bill. In fact, earlier in their career, they kind of got lumped in with Christian rock because there are some religious undertones to some of their lyrics. But musically, very progressive. Vocally, they had great harmonies, and they were very much, like I said, a power trio in the vein of Rush. But unfortunately, somehow or another, because of the timing of their one hit, "It's Love," being mixed in with everything else, hair metal and whatever else was going on, I kind of feel like they got cast aside as well when Grunge took over. Even though, again, here's a band that is definitely somewhere in between the two musically, but probably had more leanings toward, alternative or underground, more so than anything hair metal. And the last band I want to talk about is a band called Ugly Kid Joe. Everybody might remember their song, Hate Everything About You. They also had a huge hit with a cover of Cats in the Cradle. And again, a band, this is probably the most sort of stuck in between band you could ever imagine because, they were very mainstream rock, but they weren't, quite a hair band. These guys were like surfers from California or whatever. And they definitely were stuck somewhere in between hair metal and alternative. And unfortunately for them, because of the hits and because of the timing, even though Everything I Hate About You came out really towards the end, right when the transition was starting, they still got lumped into that category. And even after Cats in the Cradle, it was like the next album, the next album they put out after they had the Cats in the Cradle hit, barely even touched the charts. And that's unfortunate because it was a band that, while mainstream, definitely could have fit in with what was becoming, what was taking over, I guess, for lack of a better way to put it. So again, I kind of use this vlog just to get things out of my head and onto some other format. Because I do have a lot of knowledge. I read a lot of CD notes and record notes and, internet stuff and biographies and everything else. And I have all this knowledge in my head, just all these topics that come up in my head. So while maybe 15 people might see this and get something out of it, for me, it's more just about kind of getting things out there, maybe putting ideas in people's heads about certain bands that they may not have thought of, and even maybe giving a little bit of exposure to a few of these bands who, in my opinion, like I said, really fell by the wayside unfairly. So that's all I have. I do have some things coming up that I want to talk about. I'm really going to try to get a hold of one of those limited edition Tool albums when that comes out on August 30th. It's supposed to have some weird screen and a battery, and it plays videos and all sorts of shit. Again, I'm a very casual Tool fan, but I'll go ahead and spend the 45 or 50 bucks or whatever it is to get one of those, so I can kind of open it and present it on camera and stuff, because that's fun for me. And then coming up in early October, Whitesnake, who are a huge favorite of mine, are putting out a 30th anniversary of their Slip of the Tongue record. It's going to be a box set. I think it's got like 6 CDs, a DVD, and all sorts of other shit inside. So I think it would be kind of fun, if I can get that on the day it comes out, to open that up on camera, kind of like I did with the Def Leppard box set a couple months ago. So stay tuned. Hopefully you enjoyed this. Hopefully my graphics aren't too blurry. I'll work on that as I go. And everybody take care. See you.